Chaim, thank you very much for your invitation. I've worked on ego documents several times before in the past, but these were normally the confessions of prisoners in the Portuguese Inquisition of the 16th century. This morning, however, I will speak about a source from a different epoch and environment, and a source of a more quotidian character. And it is for that very reason that I find this source unique. So, shortly about the documents that I will present. 2.5 years ago, in January 2021, I received an email from Schneitach, a small town near Nuremberg in central Franconia. I will give you a map here of the 18th century situation. You see the imperial city of Nuremberg that did not tolerate Jews. Next to Nuremberg, you had the big Jewish community of Fürth, and you had a number of small communities around where Jews were allowed to live, and one of them was an enclave on the Nuremberg territory, which was the enclave of Rothenburg, belonging to knights, and later to Bavaria. And there you have the city of Schneitach. Now, from this place, I received an email, and my correspondent, who introduced herself as Birgit Kroder-Guhmann, an amateur historian in that small town. She knew about a collection of Yiddish documents in the communal archives of that place. These papers, she claimed, had been found in the Geniza, in the attic of the former synagogue, a 16th century synagogue, which is preserved until now, when this building was renovated in the 1990s. And the late Professor Andreas Angersdorfer in Augsburg had looked through these documents back then and found out that these were personal letters directed to Meyer Heller Bretzfeld, the rabbi of that rural community in the first quarter of the 19th century. The documents written by family members contained considerable information on everyday life of Jews in Franconia. And Mrs. Kroder-Guhmann then wrote to me, "It is very important that this trove soon be lifted, and I would be happy if you could take care of it. Would you be interested in this task and perhaps even enjoy it?" So I accepted this offer because this collection sounded intriguing to me, and I helped organize a little research project with the help of the Bavarian government and the Jewish Museum of Fürth with a graduate student from the University of Vienna, Paula Somodi. And the material has meanwhile been digitized, we have transcribed it, and it will all be published in the next year. All in all, we have transcribed 36 documents, which offer a rare opportunity, allowing to study rural Jewish life in pre-emancipation Germany from a new perspective of personal testimony. Letters have been abundantly theorized in the framework of ego documents, and as all ego documents, they're subjective, and at the same time, they obey certain literary patterns and social rules of self-fashioning that always limit even the knowledge that we can extract on the writer's personal and subjectivity. Unlike diaries and autobiographies, they possess a number of characteristics that make them even more problematic, because letters are always fragments that lack the coherence of the correspondence that we do not have anymore. We have mostly only one side of the correspondence and only selected part of it, be it that personal meetings, oral communication, or between our protagonists, or also escape us. So letters are evolving. They want to obtain a certain evolution in the relationship between the writer and the addressee, and they construct a self that is designed to influence the addressee. And with a phrase that is sometimes quoted by Catherine Hobbes, she has called letters a moving target of human life being enacted. I think that summarizes the problem quite well. And even if we accept the disappointing truth that a letter is not a faithful depiction of the ego, and I do not think any one of us has believed that anyway, we can study it for other good reasons. Obviously, the disadvantages of epistolary sources can also become assets. Letters are conventional, but we should ask, especially for pre-emancipation Jews, which conventions of literacy and self-expression these peddlers, women, children followed in such an age. To be sure, what letters document is not the ego, but the human relationship between the writer and the addressee. But we might be interested precisely in this relationship if, for example, as you will see, we study the horizon of authority that a pre-modern rabbi commanded among his personal acquaintances. And sure, correspondences are transmitted in fragments, and selectively, if at all, but isn't it fascinating to ask who applies which selection principles upon archiving correspondence and keeping certain letters by dropping others? So, what is most interesting in that source I found is its time frame. It is really a time period from where we have very little private letters. There are only a small number of exceptional corpora. You may have heard about the archives of certain so-called court Jews, such as the London Rothschild or the Levi-Löwenberg family in Hohenems, or the famous box in the musicology section of the State Library in Berlin, which contains Moses Mendelssohn's love letters to his bride from at Guggenheim. There are some texts from famous rabbis with family greetings at the bottom, and there is one or other fragment from a Geniza, but larger collections of letters from ordinary people before emancipation, 18th, early 19th century, like our bundle of Schneitach, are very rare to come by. And this letter writing is interesting because it made a diaspora in smaller places, a dispersed diaspora possible. And this is particularly true for this network of Jewish communities scattered through the Franconian countryside towns. We must see here three levels together: a personal level of emotional self-expression within the family, a textual level of popular literacy and letter writing within the family, using the Hebrew script, but at the same time the local dialect elements from standard German or from French at that time, and then a social level realized within institutions such as marriage brokering, child rearing, religious gatherings, and the community functions of the rabbi, who is in this case at the center of all this. So let me first introduce my hero. Meyer Bretzfeld was born about 1747 in Pretzfeld in Upper Franconia, and he was a descendant of the Heller family, that is the descendants of the Tausfos Yontov, Yomtov Liebmann Heller. From 1769 to 1801, he was a local rabbi and a circumciser in Adolsdorf, which is also in Upper Franconia in the countryside. And from then to his death in 1823, 200 years ago, he was the last provincial rabbi or Landesrabbiner in Schneitach in central Franconia. And the trove in the communal archive, these 36 documents that I talked about, come from his personal estate and is situated between the dates of 1787 and 1820. 7 of these documents are related to his professional tasks as a rabbi. 21 are incoming correspondence from his family members. And the other 8 are letters from unrelated or unidentified persons. The entire corpus is certainly not from the Geniza, as my correspondence has claimed. If you look at the physical state of the letters, at the right you have an example from the Bretzfeld correspondence, and at the left you have an example from a document that was certainly found in the Schneidach Geniza, in the synagogue. You see the difference. You see for the Geniza documents the rotten corners, the mouse bites, the dust that you do not have in the other documents. So my guess is that the Bretzfeld papers were looted from a local Jewish collection in November 1938 during the Nazi pogrom, that they then stayed in the communal archives, and that they're still trying to make up their mind of how to pass this to the public. The letters were sent to Schneidach from different places in the vicinity, within a radius of about 20 to 60 kilometers, a number of different places in Upper Franconia and Lower Franconia. Well, some letters are from Lower Franconia, about 120 kilometers apart. These letters comment quite extensively on the process of letter writing and letter sending, the different technicalities of staying in contact, because these letters were normally sent by means of merchants and peddlers who acted as messengers, and only a minority of the letters used the then regular postal services. We have much information on the character of the relationship between the correspondents, which is sometimes objectivized in the form of personal duties and obligations, on their personal involvements in them, and sometimes subjectively expressed in emotional terms. So family members try to influence the rabbi, their social superior, by expressing basically three types of emotions towards him. And one are certain forms of indignation, of dissatisfaction. The other one are expressions of affection and love. And the third form of emotion is sadness, the attempt at arousing compassion. So let me start with a common emotion that is expressed in the letters quite frequently, and that is indignation, indicating that the addressee has in some form not fulfilled the expectations set on him, and that he must now live up to his social role. And we find already in one of the earliest extant family letters a powerful clash of indignation and counter-indignation on the background of the social inequality between the rabbi and one of his students, who writes, Moshe Luke Wannbach, a cantor and school teacher in the village of Goldbach in Lower Franconia, so he is a bit farther away. He writes to the rabbi on December 23rd, 1788, a letter negotiating his planned marriage to the rabbi's daughter, Balia. The text is a fragment of a larger correspondence, and we understand from Moshe's allusions in this letter that Bretzfeld had offered him the hand of his daughter with 500 guilders of dowry, while Moshe, was a cantor at Fürth. Moshe, however, had refused the offer, quite bluntly, and the rabbi had then answered in a very sharp tone, suspecting him of planning to defraud him. And Moshe answered then in the extant letter, "Truly, I would not have thought that my teacher and master could become so angry, Broiges, and compose a letter that is filled with scorn, Zilzulim, from the beginning to the end. I believe, though, that someone has given him a bad advice, because I know that my teacher and master is slow to enrage." So he quotes the Talmud here in order to characterize his addressee. Let us now look in detail how Moshe in his letter repairs the fallout with the rabbi, who is a psychological parent of his and a social superior, but who at the same time has deeply insulted him. He starts flattering him with an enormous amount of Hebrew honorifics. That's how he starts. You see that there on top of the letter. He states the extreme emotional stress that the rabbi's letter has provoked in him. I transcribe that here at the bottom. Die große Ungehaltenheit, über welches mich geriert geriert means, well, some kind of a strong emotional reaction. He threatens even to break up the relationship entirely if he had not been held up by his gratitude for the rabbi's former good deeds. He presents his excuses then and declares that he was only trying to be honest. And he has lots of expressions in which he manifests his honesty. He said that he is not trying to be billig with second thought, not trying to be false. And he was sure that the rabbi would raise the dowry to 700 guilders, and that was the only reason of his refuse. He insists on his absolute sincerity in a number of different terms. I know myself best among all people, and he knows very well what his financial needs are. He says that he did not even have the intelligence to be false, to be billig, and that the rabbi should trust his sincere conviction, aufrichtiges Gemüt. So there is a clash between the terms emes, that he vindicates for himself, and billig, meaning political, false, which means two different psychological states. And he uses a Hebrew Yiddish word, emes, to denote sincerity, and a European term that has gone all the way through the Greek and Latin, French, German, and finally the Franconian dialectal filter to signify falsehood and malice. And then he announces that he would come for a visit in person during his Passover vacation and arrange the matter. And we gain a clue on what is actually happening at the time he writes his letter when we look at an external document, and that is the circumcision register kept by Rabbi Bretzfeld, which I discovered in the National Library of Jerusalem recently. And there we find a wonderful happy end to all this marriage brokering story, because exactly 8 months after this letter, in August 1789, a revolution that meanwhile happened in Paris, Rabbi Bretzfeld traveled to the city of Fürth and circumcises there the first son of Moshe and Balaam, who meanwhile had been married. So reconsidering the indignated letter that Moshe wrote and that the rabbi had kept for good reason, I do not think Moshe could have seriously threatened to break off all contacts with the rabbi when he had just impregnated his daughter. And yet this Moshe would become Rabbi Bretzfeld's most regular correspondent. So most of the letters that Rabbi Bretzfeld has kept come from this son-in-law. And he repeatedly gets back into this indignated mood when the rabbi, for example, does not reply quickly enough. And keeping this document is in a certain relation with the other 5 documents that the rabbi has kept, in which he and his son-in-law built up a quite active and successful network for marriage brokering all over the region, with which the rabbi also financed part of his income. How much time do I have left? 5 minutes. Okay, so the other emotions I would like to comment upon, love and sadness. Let us take a look at the expressions of marital love and commitment. Rabbi Bretzfeld became a widower when he was about 60 years old. He remarried in 1807 with the widow Fromit from Sulzburg, a village 50 kilometers south of Schneitach. Bretzfeld kept 2 bridal letters of his second wife, as this was customary among married couples. And his bride had 1 married daughter and 3 more children in a marriageable age. For this reason, it seems, she was greatly eager to get remarried herself. And in her letters, she tried to flatter and please the rabbi already by writing all addresses and salutations in Hebrew. You see that on the top. Shalom v'chol tov, la'adoni, ahovi, etc. She writes in Hebrew, which is not so common among women in this correspondence. And she integrates the expression "my future husband" among his rabbinical titles, המאור הגדול המיועד להיות אישי נזר ועטרה לראשי, etc. So this is kind of part of his titles. When greeting her bridegroom and introducing herself, she uses a language of friendship, which in this context is meant to stay within formal conventions of the time, while allowing for a potential romantic connotation. So in the other letter she writes at the end, I am forever your truthful and sincere friend, auf immer seine wahre, aufrichtige Freundin. And in the second letter she expresses joy and love, pleasure and longing, but she refers all these amorous emotions exclusively to his letters, not to his person. So this is on the borderline between the formal and between the romantic. The remainder of the letter is quite matter of fact. So she organizes basically the technicalities of the marriage. She manages to play several roles. She's the faithful admirer of her rabbi, a reliable business partner, and a potential loving wife and stepmother, because she sends also greetings to her potential stepdaughter who lives with the rabbi. And at the very end of the letter, she begs Rabbi Bretzfeld's comprehension for her impatience with the shidduch, because she has a second candidate and does not want to miss him in case the rabbi turns her down. However, she assured she would prefer to marry him. So this is a very subtle game between various registers, from the Hebrew to the German, from the romantic to the matter-of-fact, and which implies quite a smart control of emotional expression. And I come very briefly to my third example, which is the rabbi's son, Shimon Hirtz, who at the age of 24 tries to become a cantor and a teacher in different villages, but he is extremely unlucky, as he confesses in one of the letters. He says he has had to abandon one position as cantor because of his weak chest. He had to move to the countryside as a tutor and a slaughterer. And he fills his letters with melancholy reflections, asking his father to let him come back to his Schneitach rabbinical house. He writes, I have been 5 or 6 years in the foreign country with little luck, wenig Guts, and few moments of health. I agreed to toil in the foreign country all of my life. I must play the old Bacher, and I struggle very much in my young years to have a parnossa, an income. And what will I have to go through when Cholila I become old? So he has a very melancholy a picture of a very sad reflection on life, which he shares with his father. 4 years later, however, Shimon Hirsch had accepted another job in Lower Franconia, and his father is coming to visit him, and suddenly he is very joyful. Just look at the difference between the handwriting, that's the same person. Here that's the sad letter, and this is a letter in which he is exuberantly joyful. Oh, my dear father, how great is my joy that I will have the honor to embrace you, and so on. And you see when he writes the salutation in Hebrew, he makes lots of mistakes. He writes the Hebrew according to the Franconian dialect. Those who know Hebrew can see it there, because he apparently loses control. And we have a third letter in which he comes back to the very gloomy state. That is a few years later, he has again lost his job. He has again a new job, is about to lose it. And expressions of sadness and love combine into a kind of urgent feeling of homelessness. So let me conclude. I've tried to pursue the interest of these family correspondence by observing the way in which pre-emancipation Jewish letter writers speak about their personal feelings, convictions, hopes, and worldviews within the framework of Jewish social institutions and the targeted exercises of epistolary self-fashioning. The letters were written to the rabbi by social inferiors who desired a favor from him. A decision, an advice, an order, a letter, a conversation, a visit, an invitation. Sometimes the writers have financial gains or pleas. In 3 cases, they desire to get married to him or to one of his daughters. So displaying a register of emotions was crucial for obtaining these favors. And all these emotions are tied to epistolary conventions and social strategies, but they are nonetheless authentic. Shimon Hirsch, the maniac, depressive son, gives so strong expressions of his frustration and joy that they almost compose a clinical picture. And from it, in her bridal letters, gives a nuanced painting of her mental state. And the only unsincere person is the indignated Moshe, who constantly stresses how deadly sincere he is. But even he would prove to be an utterly reliable man in the course of time. So you have a certain personality that expresses himself in quite a coherent way. So these letters reveal a cycle of close and distant people for whom Rabbi Bretzfeld exercised authority also through his personal and private presence. The social world that they describe predates the development of the Emancipation period insofar as it is fully Jewish. That means there are hardly any non-Jews who appear in this family life. Moreover, the Jewish family circles are strongly inward-looking. All the descendants of Bretzfeld are attached to the Schneitach rabbinical residence. They experience the separation from the father as a crisis and suffer from that, what Shimon Hirsch calls the foreign space. The family members who expressed themselves in these letters lived in a hierarchically structured and well-organized or ordered society. Their way of life conjures up all the standard patterns of old worldly rural Jewry, and justifiably so. However, these letter writings express themselves as individuals who, even before the upheavals of modernity, struggle creatively to carve out their place inside the social order mediated by Jewish institutions. What makes these letters so fascinating is that they introduce us to pre-modern egos of men and women who often felt at odds with their environment and who constantly explored their own psychology in search of the reactions, the resources, the remedies to these manifold threats and shortcomings of human relations. Thank you.
I liked the part at the start where you were kind of self-reflexive over how the archive came to be, where it comes from, how this kind of process started. I think especially in private correspondences like this one, or in terms of their privately access ones, it's really important to do that, to identify how, as you said, the archive exists as it does in its current state, right? And also noting the kind of the journey of the collection, the biography of the letters themselves, as opposed to the contents of them. I suppose in that way I want to ask you, the ones that we have, the few letters that we have that you're talking about, are the ones that exist now purely through chance, do you know, or do you think there's something specific about the letters that we have that have been that actually found in the synagogue? Are they specific ones that have been chosen to be kept, or is it just chance that they are?
Well, look at this list that I here. That's quite striking. That apparently someone wanted to keep one letter, at least, from each family member, and chose a certain letter. So I suppose that this was the rabbi, who had his own collection of memories, and this fits to the fact that some of the letters are from quite crucial stages in the life of the family. So I suppose that this was his own selection, and I can just guess, but I suppose that this collection stayed in the community archive in Schneitach, which the community kept since the 17th century, and in the beginning of the 20th century, when the oldest part of this archive was sent to Berlin, to the Gesamtarchiv. They probably kept this collection in Schneitach because it was too private, or it was not thought to represent the community history, while a collection of his successor, Judah Wolf Neckarsulmer, in the rabbinate of Schneitach, was sent to Berlin and is now in Jerusalem. But this collection has a number of letters, but only rabbinical letters. So all the private stuff has been taken out, whereas the Bresfeld connection is exactly the opposite. It is just the private matters. So I have the impression that at this moment, when they decided what to send to Berlin and what to keep in Schneitach, they made this decision between public and private. And I have, against what they have told me there in this place, that it comes from the Geniza, I have the impression that these remainders of archives that were still in Schneitach in 1938 were looted by the Nazis and have come to the possession of the archives now. So, but this is not very clear. And meanwhile, they have donated the letters to the Jewish Museum.
I have just a technical question. You mentioned that one letter we can see that the writer is exuberant and the other is more sad, according just to the handwriting. So I wonder if graphology can be used as a tool to analyze personal letters. I mean, also, is it considered academic enough, I mean, reliable enough in academic circles?
Well, graphology has its own methodology, and I'm not competent to apply it. And what I apply are more common sense observations. I'll give you an example. The letter by his bride, so the widow from Salzburg, who is going to become his second wife, she starts in Hebrew, and you see how the letter is formed. So she has apparently written this in Hebrew, and then the German text that she writes later has another slant. So she must have asked someone, how do you say that in Hebrew? And then you see how she writes Hamiyuad liyot ishi. She writes He Yud Mem Ayin Dalet. So someone must have told you, write a mem, write a yud. What? A mem, a yud. She writes that twice, and then she goes on writing in. So this is not her own Hebrew, probably.
So the marriage was arranged. He is due to be her husband.
Yes.
Why does she write a letter? What is she saying in the letter? If I would have understood that if she writes this way before they are it's settled that they want to get married, it's one thing. But this beginning, why?
Perhaps it was in the start of a bourgeois custom, which is the bridal letter.
Okay.
That the couple, after engagement, has an epistolary relation, normally with a certain number of romantic conventions. And we know that very well through Mendelssohn and this correspondence with Frommit, which is precious and which is conserved.
Mendelssohn, you got it in this letter.
So this is half a century earlier, Mendelssohn. And I think it is interesting that with his first wife, he has no letter from her. So apparently he never corresponded with her. When he was living with her, of course, they did not write letters, and they did not write letters before. So this is a significant person in his life of which he has not kept any letter. And at that time, at the beginning of the 19th century, this was considered to be something that future spouses should do, exchange a few letters. And what Frommit writes in his letter, I often technical things about which letter she wrote, which letter she got, who took the letter, who will give it, and then I won't bother you much, there is not much to tell, but it is important for her that there is a piece of paper that carries her name and that carries a few formula, and that is exchanged back and forth. Apparently this is a non-Jewish custom as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very common.
Yeah, yeah. Which, in spite of the marriage brokering, was observed between future spouses.
Similar writing, even it's in French. At the Rothschild archives, a letter between Charlotte, due to be married to Lionel, at the Rothschild, and she was 16, he was 29, and they had a very happy marriage. And she was a constant writer. When she had children, she wrote to each child 20 pages later every day, informing what's going on.
Oh.
And I saw something very similar, and this is about the same period, meaning it's 1810, 1815.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit earlier than people think that you can find such a way. So it corresponds with what you say here.
Uh-huh.
So you have to look at some procedures, maybe earlier than we tend to look at it and we find something.
Yeah, but I find it interesting that the marriage brokering practices cool down the tone, because she must always consider that perhaps she will get another shidduch,
Mm-hmm.
and this will not be him. So she cannot go too enthusiastic, but at the same time she has to commit herself,
Yeah.
and she does that quite well, I think.
Yeah, that's nice.
Question about the future. Now that we all do emails or WhatsApp, does that mean this field that you presented now is over? I mean, how will we do such a research on a rabbinical family with WhatsApp today? I mean, we will not have paper trail. So, is this a challenge to the whole field of ego documents?
Well, my WhatsApp asks me every time whether I will back up and when I will back up and how often and so on.
The question is,
So,
today my son works in the National Archives, so I know a government official, when he finishes his job, he has to give his content of his computer to the archive. Now, of course, they omit everything that they don't want you to see, which they're not allowed to do, and sometimes they don't do it, and then all the really important stuff they did on their private email or whatever. So actually we have, and then we have no technology to read hard disks from,
From Einstein.
no, it's true. You can't. We are going to be challenged in writing this type of research. The next generation of researchers trying to do eager documents will be certainly challenged in the way it does it. Will we have an lecture on Facebook posts?
We have the same problem with the
possible.
master
Yeah, of course.
of writers, for example. You can see the first.
Yeah, but with AI and all the espionage programs, look at it the other way. You will be able to get access on personal things that
Yeah.
most people wouldn't want to be personal.
But you claim that this was edited, meaning that he selected from each member of the family a letter or two.
yes.
Do you see any sense in editing this way? Or?
In editing,
Yeah, because you say he edited, he chose one letter from each one of the family.
yeah, he constituted his archive
Yeah.
of letters, it seems.
So, why does he choose this letter on the other one? You don't know.
One cannot know, one can only guess.
Yeah.
But,
So what's the guess?
He has probably not received any letters from his wife from the moment they lived together, so there was not so much of a choice. And from his son-in-law, probably he has kept this very crucial letter. because there was a dramatic situation which he remembered and wanted to remember.
Okay.
And there are other letters. By the way, I have one letter from his daughter, which I presented as from his son. But in fact, it's a letter in which his daughter, after she gets married, wants to speak to him about her marriage problems, and heaps quite a number of very kind expressions on him, which is very flattering for him. And for this reason, he has maybe kept this letter as well,
So
which shows all her love for him.
There's some hidden agenda when he is picking them up. So, okay.
I suppose, but we might do the same thing. That's also an answer to Boaz's question, that we might end up downloading one email from each correspondent in order to have an idea or to have a memory of someone. Nobody keeps entire correspondences on his hard disk.